Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening and welcome to this Strategy and Resources Committee meeting on Thursday, the 29th of January 2026. My name is Councillor John Driver and I am the chair of this committee. Members, we are streaming this meeting live as well as recording, and by being present in the meeting, you are giving your consent to being recorded. During each item, please put your hand up to indicate if you wish to speak. I will then invite you at the appropriate time. Could I remind members to avoid approaching the top table, as this could create interference with the cameras and live stream. Please note that the YouTube live stream sound recording is dependent on the correct use of the microphones. Therefore, can I ask that when invited to speak, you remember to turn on your microphone and turn it off when finished. Please reference a page or paragraph number when referring to the agenda papers and keep your contributions as clear and concise as possible. We do not have any fire alarms testing scheduled for today. However, we may have periodic fire alarms, and I remind members to ensure they sign in and out. I understand that wasn't possible this evening, but they sign in and out when entering the council offices. If you hear the fire alarm, please exit using either of the two marked fire escape routes. Once out of the building, please proceed to the designated muster point located on the grass verge by the police station entrance. On to agenda item 2 then, apologies for absence. So could we have apologies, Ms Bird, please?
Yes, Chairman, thank you very much. Apologies been received from Councillor Durham and Councillor Stilts, and Councillor Stamp is attending as a substitute for Councillor Stilts, and Councillor Morgan as a substitute for Councillor Durham. Thank you, Chairman. Thank
you very much, Ms Bird. We move on then to agenda item 3, which is the minutes. It is recommended that the minutes of the meeting held on Thursday, the 20th of November 2025, found on pages 5 to 28 as approved, are true and accurate record. I so move. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Thompson, thank you very much. Can we agree by assent, members? Thank you very much. We move on. Agenda item 4 then is declarations of interest. To disclose the existence and nature of any disclosable pecuniary interest, other registrable interests and non-registrable interests relating to items of business on the agenda having regard to paragraph 9 and appendix B of the Code of Conduct for members. Members are reminded that they are also required to disclose any such interest as soon as they become aware, should the need arise throughout the meeting. Members, any declarations of interest? Councillor Burrow-Cook.
Thank you, Chair. Declaration of interest, pecuniary declaration of interest on item 9, business rates and council tax discretionary reductions, as I am the tenant of the Queen Victoria Public House.
Thank you very much for that. Okay. Any others? No. Right, we move on then. Agenda item 5, public participation. I can advise that we have not received any submissions from members of the public, so we can move on swiftly to agenda item 6, which is the Strategic Assets Working Group recommendation, pages 27 to 30. I understand that Ms Thompson is going to, Councillor Thompson, apologies, is going to introduce this briefly and then hand over to Ms Green. Thank you, Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Chairman. As the purpose of the report is to consider the recommendation of the Strategic Assets Working Group relating to the Celebration Pathway project. And as you said, I'm now going to hand over to Ms Green to take us through it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, members. So the purpose of this report is to bring forward proposals regarding the original Celebration Pathway project. As part of the delivery of our programme of work on Promenade Park, of which this was one of the projects, the projects are regularly scrutinised by the Strategic Assets Working Group. When this project was reviewed by the Strategic Assets Working Group at the end of last year, there was a consensus of a view from the group that this project should not proceed. The reasons for that are detailed at paragraph 3.5. At 3.6, the group clarified that they felt it was more important to invest in maintaining and enhancing the current assets rather than creating a new scheme and project. And therefore, it was recommended an alternative proposal, and that alternative proposal is set at 3.7, which is to use the funding to bring forward the refurbishment of the existing coronation shelter to enable it to be fully back into use by the public and enable the views from the shelter to be maximised, and also enhance the area through a natural planting scheme which would complement the existing planting scheme within the adjacent secret garden, and create a natural biodiversity area for children to enjoy and run around in. We anticipate that the cost of the alternative works would be within the original budget of the original proposal, and that was 109,000. So in conclusion, Chairman, having carefully considered the Celebration Pathway project, the Strategic Assets Working Group are recommending that project ceases, and instead the alternative proposal at paragraph 3.7 proceeds. Thank you,
Okay,
Chairman.
thank you, Ms Green. So the recommendations relating to this agenda item are, can be found on page 27. Recommendation little 1, that the project to deliver the celebration pathway does not proceed. Little 2, that the coronation shelter is refurbished and a new natural planting scheme is introduced to that area to complement the recently completed secret garden area and planting. And little 3, the current funding allocated to the celebration pathway of 109,000 is utilised to fund the work at little 2, with any underspend returned to the balances. I so move. Do I have a second? Councillor Lagan, thank you very much. Members, any questions? Councillor Stamp.
Thank you, Chair. Just one, do we have a rough estimate or guesstimate of what the coronation shelter refurbishment would actually cost? I know we've got plenty of money, 109,000. Do we have any indication what that would be? Obviously, the remainder I know goes into the reserves.
Thank you. We've had a recent indication of cost, which would be in the range of about £90,000.
Okay, Councillor Lagan.
Just a quick one. What refurbishment is a very open topic. What is the refurbishment, please?
Green.
Thank you, Chairman. So that's to bring it back into full use. So that's all the repairs and maintenance that haven't been done, to bring it back into full use.
I'm sorry, I don't want to be picky, but what does that mean? Because it's in use at the moment. Are we putting portholes in it? Are we painting snakes and ladders on it? Are we putting seating in it? What's the value for the community? So what's the objective of that? Or are we just going to fix the roof and leave it open?
Chairman, it's to undertake that is work on the roof, is work on the structure. I can provide I can circulate the details of what was proposed that we obtained through the quote process, if that would help. Happy to circulate that.
If that would help, Councillor Lagan.
Yeah, it would, Chair, because I can't support something I don't know what I'm going to get. Yeah, that's just a view. I mean, I'm pleased to see it being used, being refurbished, but what is it actually going to be? Because at the moment, I don't know.
Okay, well, this is a proposal that's come from the Strategic Assets Working Group, but if you could provide Councillor Lagan with, Mr. J.
Paragraph 3.7 has some further detail if that helps.
Okay, thank you. Yes, yeah, 3.7. Okay, well, it gives you a little bit more information. Okay, well, I think an offer has been made by Ms Green to provide you with further information, Councillor Lagan. So I think as far as where we are now is concerned, that's where we are. Essentially, I take it that you're unhappy to make a decision based on that, but maybe others can. Councillor Fiddick.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, just quick on the point that Councillor Lagan just raised. I mean, would there not be a separate business case coming forward for the coronation shelter that would need to be approved by members anyway? Or are we actually approving the coronation shelter here? Because
Ms Green, do you want to respond to that?
Thank you, Chairman. This is refurbishment work. This is maintenance work that would need to be done on the shelter anyway. So if members decided they didn't want to approve this, it would come forward as a bid in terms of undertaking the work that's required.
Okay, yep. So it's essentially a maintenance requirement, and it just provides a source of money to actually get that work done. Okay. Councillor Siddle.
Thank you, Chair. So, yeah, the proposal has been discussed at the Strategic Asset Working Group when we discussed the fact that we weren't going to go ahead with the celebration pathway. Proposals were put forward in terms of refurbishing and creating some planting spaces and to put in some more flower beds and making it more usable. So it has gone through the Strategic Asset Working Group, and the Strategic Asset Working Group members were happy with the proposals that were put forward by officers.
Thank you very much. Councillor Spenceley and then Councillor Stamp.
So the only thing I would note about this with regard to any time delay now is that I know we do have park staff who I believe Councillor Lagan as chair has met, who are very enthusiastic about the planting there, and the idea is to really increase the biodiversity there. I do know that because I have visited the site and spoken to that member of staff. And just to be mindful of the fact that if we delay this, it's fine, but bearing in mind planting season, I think it will cause us some problems with regards to the planting that was intended and would have to be potentially be delayed for quite a long while to be successful, because with our changing climate, if you plant too late in the season now, it won't take. So anyway, I'll leave that there. Thank you.
Councillor Spenceley. Councillor Stamp and then Councillor Lagan.
Shall I give way to Councillor Lagan first?
Thank you, Councillor Stamp. As Councillor Siddle knows, I sit on the Strategic Assets Working Group because it's a subgroup of this group, and I understand that. My point is, if we're spending £100,000 or £90,000, what does that actually involve? Now I know it's to bring it up into structurally sound. That's different to refurbish to get more use for the children, which is what it says in the report. So that's the ambiguity that I had. And I'm not going to support it because I think it needs doing, and the planting obviously is what Councillor Spenceley has said. So yes, I will be happy to support it, but I think we need to have that clarity.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Lagan. Councillor Stamp, sorry. Councillor Stamp.
Yeah, thank you. I think we keep having these issues because it's all right working groups get all the information, but I really do feel we should be attaching something to agendas or links that the members of the public, in the interest in open and transparency, and other members. I know, Chair, you wasn't at the training session last night, but a member,
I
know you
had.
Yes, I know. I wasn't having a dig. I know where you were. But what I was trying to say was that a member at the training working group last night, turned around and said that they wasn't aware of something because it hadn't most probably come into their view. Now, Councillor Stills many weeks ago raised an issue saying she thought there was a link should be put to any recommendations that if anybody wants to go and look at it before the council meeting, they can go and do their own research. Now, I think that is a really good idea, and I think it should be done, and then we won't have questions like Councillor Lagan and this going forward. So I hopefully the Chief Exec is listening to that, because I don't think it's a big job, because the pictures or whatever would have been presented to that working group, and surely something could be put on for members of the public, Chair.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stamp. I mean, I think we'll take that outside the meeting. I take your point, and I think that message that you've delivered is heard. There is clearly a balance between what actually gets discussed within these committee meetings and the working groups that's meant to inform them. So it's just, so there is a sort of balance. But you're right. We need enough information for members to feel that they've got what they need to make a decision. I understand that. So I think unless there's anybody else burning, Councillor Fittock, I'll take one more. Because
I fully understand it, and I can understand what it is we want to try to do, but to me it's probably not the correct protocol to follow, because really what we're saying is that we've got something that we have got to maintain that we should have budgeted for. We aren't going to do it, but we've got some money slopping around elsewhere for something we approved, so we're going to use ourselves instead. That isn't really the way that we should be doing business, but I would support it. I just would say that these things need to be presented in I'm not entirely sure that's the right way to do it, personally.
Well, point taken. All right, and we may be outside of this meeting just look at how we do that. Nobody else is sort of leaping up and down, so we'll go to a vote. So those in favour of the recommendation, will you put your hands up, please? Those against? Carried. Okay, thank you very much, members. We move on then to agenda item 7, Budget Monitoring Report, period 8, end November 2025. This can be found on pages 31 to 44. And Mr. J, I think you're presenting this. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. So, members of the committee, this is a regular update. It's not the standard quarterly update. The reason is set out at paragraph 3.1. Period 8 is a good opportunity to take stock of the position in the current year in order to get clarity on the planning position for the coming year. So this helps to provide the background for the planning papers around the budget for next year, which are later on in the agenda. The reason that it's often period 8 is the year to the end of November is the most up-to-date record that we have in terms of the forecast in the current year. If you wait until you get quarter 3, which is period 9, it tends to be quite difficult to get that. You get a lot of accuracy at period 8, and it's a good touch point to make sure that we know where we are with all of this. So the report itself sets out, and you can see the recommendations in section 2. We're currently running slightly under budget, 0.7% under budget, the budget of about 13.9 million, currently forecasting an underspend or under budget outturn of 104,000. The details of that are set out by different service areas in Appendix 1, along with some explanation of the variances. Looking down further in the recommendations, it picks up also the anticipated spend in capital, which is also detailed in Appendix 2. Obviously, with capital, we do our best to ensure that we get a clear forecast on the outturn as we come towards it. Members, I'm sure, will be aware that at the early point of the year, through quarter 1, quarter 2, we see less capital expenditure. Schemes are often getting going. During period quarter 3 and certainly into quarter 4, we see a lot more expenditure going through. So the overall level of expenditure is rising as we go through the final quarter. Some things will fall one side of the 31st of March, other things will fall the other side of the 31st of March, and therefore there may be some variation as we get towards the end of the year. We will try to get that right, obviously. What will tend to happen is that if a scheme is underspent slightly in the current year, money will be slipped forward and the scheme will be completed in the following year. Otherwise, sometimes it goes the other way around, costs will come into the current year, but the scheme itself works in the normal way. So with capital, it works slightly differently to revenue, and those details are set out in Appendix 1 and Appendix 2. The reserves position is set out in Appendix 3, and then there's a detail in Appendix 4 about how we've moved from the February 25 council approved original budget, and there's been some changes to budget along the way. In terms of the key issues outside of that general overview of financial performance so far, key issues I'd point to, I've already mentioned paragraph 3.1. This is a good starting point for setting the budget for next year, and what we can see is that against the base budgets of the council, those base budgets seem to be broadly in line. They seem to be in the right place. So the business as usual costs of the council, assuming they all persist into the coming year, we've already got a good basis for the assurance that that's the right base for the budget for the coming year. Looking on to the capital monitoring from 3.4, particularly the table at 3.4.3, we often pick up in these reports that we report by exception, and the exceptions are often where schemes have gone over time or over budget. It's not so often that we're picking up just the straightforward delivery of schemes, and what this table at 3.4.3 sets out is that during the year to the end of November, there's a large number of schemes which have been completed, and the details in the table of the budget and the actual expenditure show that actually we've got quite a few schemes in there, and they've been working to budget So these are little success stories that are going on in the background, and hopefully provide some assurance to councillors that actually the majority of the capital scheme is being delivered very much as planned. Unfortunately, what tends to happen is that where there's variation, where there's problems, that comes to councillors' notice much more often, because there's a need for a further decision, for example. This, however, gives you a bit of an update that actually the majority of things are progressing very much to plan at this point. In section 3.5, there's the inclusion of some information on the debt position to the end of November, so the same period as the rest of the report. This was something that was discussed earlier on in the year, and this section aims to give some clarity on what is a fairly volatile area, because we constantly get new invoices being issued. Things are going through the debt collection process. However, what we have seen, if I look back through the debt position at the end of each month from the start of the year until now, we've seen a general reduction, a slow reduction in the overall level of outstanding debt at the end of each month. It's not the same invoices, but the overall level is dropping slightly. In terms of the analysis of what's there at the moment, what you can see at 3.5.2, we've already agreed write-offs of 33,000 relating to general fund debt. We've also agreed write-offs of council tax and business rates debt. Put all of those together, it's 300,000 in the year to date. The amount set aside at the start of the year as provision against bad debt, we refer to it it's in the accounts at note 13 as the debtors impairment allowance, just over £1 million. So we have made appropriate provision. We haven't yet gone through that process of writing off everything. At the moment, we're doing quite well by that process. And just to give you a flavour of how that's working at the current time, and I know this may lead to some questions, which would be brilliant. We haven't given this level of detail for a while, so hopefully it's a helpful background for councillors on the committee. So the table at table 1 shows that as at the end of November, debt over 30 days totaled 255,000. Of that, there's a small amount which is in the 31 to 41 days old debt. The majority falls into the over 55 days. 189,000, it feels like that's quite a large amount, but the picture within that amount is that we have some items that during the process of preparing the report have been paid up. So there's 34,000 now paid. We've got a couple of accounts that actually are running a credit balance, but 117,000 out of the 189,000, we've got payment plans in place. So we're expecting to fully recover all of that. The debt hasn't yet been fully covered off, but there is a payment plan in place, and we're confident we will be securing that debt in due course. So there's 135,000 out of the 189,000 where there's a lot of good news coming through. Not too much of a problem, there's just some delays. Of the balance, internal legal processes are dealing with 15,000 of that debt, and 34,000 has been referred to the debt collection agency. It's difficult to predict what their success rate will be, but based on previous information, the debt collection agency tends to run at about 50% in terms of what they are dealing with the more difficult debt. That's the debt that officers have been unable to secure. So of that nearly £250,000, the amount that's actually causing us a worry is probably only 15,000 at this point, which is a reasonably good picture. It's a complex picture, it's a moving picture, and it behaves in a slightly different way to the revenue and capital budgets. But I hope that gives some insight for councillors into the work that officers are undertaking to ensure that debt is collected by the council in as timely a way as possible, and that action is taken on all outstanding debt. I think that's all of the points that I wish to raise and bring to councillors' attention in the committee. I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, well,
Chair,
just before you do, the recommendations, and I'll just read through the recommendations in section 2 then. Little 1, note that the recommendations are that the committee, little 1, notes the forecast revenue outturn as at the 30th of November 2025 is 104,000 under budget, that's 0.7% against the net service budget of 13.87 million. Further information can be found at Appendix 1, along with reasons for significant variances. Little 2 considers the forecast capital outturn as at the 30th of November 2025, which is for a total capital programme delivery of 5.66 million against revised budget of 6.98 million. Notes the schemes completed in the year so far, paragraph 3.6. Further information can be found at Appendix 2 along with reasons for significant variances. Little 3 approves the movement in earmark reserves set out in Appendix 3, and Little 4 notes the revenue budget reconciliation between the opening and current budget in Appendix 4. I so move. Do I have a second? Councillor Siddle, thank you very much. Member questions? Councillor Stamp.
Just a couple, please, Chair. 3.4.3, what parts or what amounts in that table are Section 106 funding? Because I don't believe they're all from this council, so it'd be interesting to see exactly how much. I'm sure Riverside Park, I can't remember the exact figure, but that had Section 106 money. And could you reassure me, or I think reassure me, about line 49, the Section 106 in the general debt table, 88,000, and I understand the figures that you're dealing with, it doesn't seem a lot, but it does to me, because Section 106 is going to community, and I'd like to know if that is being pursued, because over 31 days, I think it is now, isn't it? Did you say over 31 days? Well, 55 days is 85,945, Chair. That's a lot of money. Can the council reassure members that that is being chased? And if it's not being taken in or you're not passing it to debtors, will those sites that owe that money be put on stop? Is there any legal recourse to ensure they pay what they're owed? Thank you, Chair.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the question. In terms of the funding for the schemes set out at 3.4.3, I don't have that to hand, but I can happily share that after the meeting. It's depending on the scheme, there will obviously be a blend of different sorts and sources of funding. Some may be grants, some may be 106, etc. I know you understand all of that. I'll get some details and share that. In terms of the debt position, yes, I can confirm that that within that Section 106, there is one Section 106 agreement which is in hand through that debt collection process at the moment, and the process is working as an agreed payment per month, and I think it's spread across 3 months or something like that. So I think I don't know exactly the background for it. What I know is we have confidence that we will be securing all of that money, and there's no risk around it. If you'd like further information on that, I'm quite happy to furnish that outside of the meeting.
Okay. Councillor Lagan and then Councillor Morgan. Thank you.
Thank you. The report is really helpful for a non-financial brain like mine. Very good to see 3.4.3 projects which are delivered. The only one that jumped out to me was the amphitheatre, because we've actually got a 79,000 budget and a 79,000 actual, but I thought there was a lot more had to be committed to that.
It was.
I can check that item, Councillor. My understanding is it may well be that it's only the amount in this year. Maybe there's a prior amount in the previous year, which would explain the difference, but I can check that one.
Thank you, and thanks for the report.
Thank you. Councillor Morgan and then Councillor Siddle. Councillor Morgan.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just really picking up on the point that Councillor Stamp was asking about in the Section 106 money, I'm slightly surprised, obviously I was new to this committee, that you've actually completed a Section 106 agreement without the money being paid over. Could you perhaps explain how that was?
The exact process for a Section 106 can vary by agreement and by council. It's an area that is coming under increasing scrutiny, and I'm doing some work at the moment with director colleagues to ensure that we've got clarity on how that's all being worked through. I don't have full detail on that at the moment. I've got so far as to get confidence that I know we're in the process of collecting, which is what we should be doing to make sure we get the money in. If there's anything we can do to improve the process, obviously we'll be seeking to do that, and I'm happy to keep councillors informed as to how that progresses.
Thank you. Well, also on that table one, I'm just slightly surprised at burials. How do we end up with a debt on that? Surely that's paid up front. And also you appear to have vet inspections at 15 and then further down at 50, a vet inspection. What is the difference between those two, or why are they listed separately?
I don't have that detail immediately to hand. I'm quite happy to take it away and bring you back with an answer in due course.
The burial point?
Both, yeah.
Okay. Yes.
Just a general point on section 106 triggers. The legal agreement gets signed, and then it's very normal to have different triggers throughout the development for when different contributions are triggered, which may be when the impact on the infrastructure is required, but it also affects the cash flow for the developer. So it's by negotiating, looking how you mitigate the impact. So there'll be a range of different triggers for each development to mitigate the impact on infrastructure.
Yes.
Yeah, well, I fully take that point, but part of the other trigger is if they don't pay up, then the agreement then is there is a penalty clause in some situation, and that agreement is obviously needs to be enforced.
I'm sure it's very normal to have penalty clauses for late payments and interest being added to that, plus a penalty clause for late payments.
Just to make the point that has already been made, that though some of these figures look large, that they're in the process rather than actually this is the debt. So, and an explanation has been given as to that process. Councillor Siddle.
Thank you, Chair. So Riverside Park skate park is section 106 and was funded by section 106. The amphitheatre, that extra 79 was additional money for this year. The previous year was I think 100,000 to fund the initial work, and then that was additional money on top of that.
Yes, because of groundworks, wasn't it? Because there was issues. Yeah. Okay. Unless there are any other questions, we'll go back to the recommendations. So little 1, little 2, and little 4 are just for noting, and little 3 is for approval. Can I take them all together? Are we happy to take them all together? So those in favour, if you put your hands up, please. Any against? No, carried. Thank you very much. So we move on then. Under Procedure Rule 1, business falling under items A, B and C, or paragraph 3, shall not be displaced, but we can change the order at the discretion of the chair. So I am going to change the order of the next items. So rather than moving to agenda item 8, we'll move to agenda item 12, and we're going to work backwards through those agenda items. The reason being, having had a conversation with Mr. J, that actually this enables the financial information to be more clearly presented. So we'll do it this way round. We're covering the same items, we're just looking at these in reverse order. So we will move on to agenda item 12 at this point, which can be found on pages 339 to 354. And Mr. J, I think you're taking us through this. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Chair, for also agreeing to the change in the order. And just to clarify for the committee, the logic for me is if we can establish the overall strategic approach, it becomes easier to fit the details within that general framework, rather than trying to take a series of details and then at the end fit them all into a framework, which is the final item. It just seems more straightforward. I'm painfully conscious that something that happens quite often in local government finance is that people like me doing jobs like mine, we use an awful lot of jargon, and we're moving towards the council meeting for setting the council tax and agreeing the budget for next year. I think it's really important that as much as possible, people doing my kind of role and the way that I prefer to do this role is to try to make sure as much as possible that all committee members, all councillors have the best understanding they can of the detail of the budgets and the detail of the proposals being put forward. So you have the papers. We've also got some slides which I've discussed previously with colleagues, officer colleagues, and also with the chair. The slides are intended to be used here. I'm sure I'll be sharing detail of the slides with Finance Working Group meeting tomorrow, and there's some training for councillors on Monday afternoon to go through the details as well. So we'll be circulating the slides. Hopefully they won't change very much across those different opportunities. So the slides are there. We're looking, they correspond exactly to the agenda items. What I've tried to do is just pull out the headlines, and hopefully it's easy for people to follow, whether you prefer the PowerPoint or whether you prefer the detail of the papers and working it through. It's very much up to you. If we can move to the next slide. In terms of the MTF...
Ms. Bird, is it possible to put that full... Because I think people will not be... Unless you've got good eyesight, the screen... The presentation on the screen is it's small. Is it possible to enlarge that?
I'm not sure I can, Chairman.
Okay.
Let me just see if I share it a different way, see if that makes a difference. Bear with me a minute.
And it's on your laptops.
Oh, yes, it is. Well, if people are okay and we're happy to have it on their laptops and not worry about the screen, then let's do it that way rather than you having to fight, Ms. Bird. Are we happy with that? Yeah. Sounds like actually people are happy to look at it on their laptops. So if you could share as you were.
Yeah.
Apologies for causing a little confusion.
You're fine. Is that better? Is it a bit bigger?
I think it, yeah, slightly. I think it is. So,
yeah.
Okay, thank you.
There we go.
Thank you.
Brilliant.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. I think it's with the best intention to make things easier. Somehow I've made it more complicated, which wasn't. Anyway, I will push on. So very simply, this slide, which is also replicating some of the early paragraphs in the table in the medium-term financial strategy document, this is trying to capture the key salient factors relating to the operating context of the council as we move forward. The reorganisation of local government in Greater Essex, the first item, that will be dominating a lot of the work that is going to be undertaken as we progress through the financial year 26-27 and then on to 27-28. The expectation is that 28-29 will be the first year for the new authority. The MTFS includes 28-29. By doing so, we have a view as to what the world might look like if reorganisation is delayed. We also have a view, if reorganisation progresses, as to what's likely to be handed across to the new authority. But that will be, it changes a lot of the way that we can think about budgets and financial planning, not least because the assets and the liabilities of the council will be transferred to the successor council in due course. That changes quite a lot in terms of the way we think about financial planning. Prior years' medium-term strategies will have assumed that the council will persist into the future with no clear end date. Changing that and effectively putting an end date on it means that we need to think about resourcing in a slightly different way. The second point there is around the wider political environment. We know that follow the media headlines, there's been quite a lot of volatility in international politics in recent months. On occasion, those things create different impacts within the national UK economy, and potentially that impacts on the decisions being taken by the national government and the impact on the finances for local government. The most obvious example is after the Russian invasion of Ukraine in February 22, we saw inflation, which played through and affected local government services and other services throughout the country through that year. And then it also had an impact into the following year because of the way that contracts will pick up on the inflation rate in September and play those into the contracts for the coming year. So I don't know what's going to happen, none of us do, but it's worth bearing in mind that there is a risk around some of those factors, and that could have an impact on the way that things develop. We've also included digital around this. I think it's really important to maintain staff skills and to make sure that the services are being that staff are able to present services to residents in a way which makes best use of IT in different ways. That could be simply making sure that we are safe and cyber secure. It could be to do with using AI in different ways to help with different processes. And then there's some local factors, and I've included the local factors there. That's how our district council, our area interacts with some of those much bigger aspects of what's going on. I think it's important to note, we're a coastal area, but that also has a great benefit in terms of tourist visitors. That's a really important part of what happens throughout the district. We've also got quite significant growth in the older age group, the 65-year plus age group, which has grown at a faster rate than the national rate in that age group in recent years. So there's pressures like that to be aware of in terms of the demographic, but there's also those opportunities like tourism also to be aware of. If we can move on to the next slide. So that starts to translate the medium-term financial strategy into a medium-term financial plan. Effectively, all that's happening there is taking some of those very big concepts, which are some of the things that we talked about with the finance member working group, and starts to put numbers around them, estimates as to where we think we're going to be landing. In terms of the funding piece, the table shows a grey line about 2/3 of the way down, core spending power. It's probably a term that councillors are familiar with. It's the measure that government uses in terms of understanding overall the core spending power of each council. It's a standard measure. Certain things are inside it, certain things are outside it, and you can see some detail in there as to what's included. The most important element is the yield from council tax. So it's always good to know that government is counting into core spending power whatever we're able to raise locally. If we don't put up council tax by 2.99%, which is what government will expect us to do, they've said that explicitly, that's a problem that we have to deal with. It's not a problem that they have to deal with. And the funding that we receive has changed. You can see that in the 25-26 column, there's quite a lot of different lines in there: renewable energy, baseline funding, section 31, business rates, levies and benefits, also all these different things. And that was presented as a series of different lines in the tables. That's been replaced for the new settlement with a straightforward funding allocation on a single line. And you can see that's 4.7 million, 4.1 million, 3.4 million. What's notable is that the amount of the funding allocated through the new fair funding process is dropping, and that's being offset by the anticipated growth that government is perceiving that we will receive through the growth in the council tax base plus the growth in the council tax charge. There's all sorts of complexity around that, and there's all sorts of politics playing out around it. If there is any good news at all within it, it's the first year in a decade where we've had a multi-year settlement. Sometimes we would regret, I think, perhaps what we're asking for, but we have got a multi-year settlement. So we can see clearly what it's going to look like, and therefore we can start to plan for this. What's noticeable is when you look at all the detail around the settlement, districts don't do well. But then for a government that's already said it wants to do away with the two-tier areas, that's not really a surprise. And there is an expectation, government have been upfront about this, there is an expectation that district councils will increase council tax to the limit and will use reserves to offset some of the loss in funding. That's the government's expectation. What local politicians choose to do is up to local politicians, and they respect that, but they're clearly already boxing local politicians to a degree into a corner. If I just move on from there, there's a lot of detail in there, there's further detail within the report, but that gives an outline as to how we're looking. Just below that core spending power line, I should draw attention to EPR funding, so the extended producer responsibility funding related to waste collection. That's not within core spending power. That may be for the simple reason that it comes through from a different government department, and that's often the case. They deal with it in a slightly different way. We also have investment interest. That was included in the funding in previous years. I've now included it within the operational side of things as income in the operation side. So it's not forgotten, it's within that area, as is some of the other items included in this table previously in the 25-26 iteration of it. But if we can move on to the next slide, please. So that slide just now was around our funding. This is about the spending. And what you can see there is a series of changes, and it's analysed by the type of activity rather than the different service areas. starts with at the top there with 25-26 original budget 12.9 million. We're now looking at 13.1 million. That will then roll forward, and that moves through. We play that through, looking at those different adjustments as we go through each year. We're looking at a base budget for the council of around about 13.1, 13.2, 13.3 million. That covers all of the ongoing activities of the council in terms of spending. That's the operating side of things. That compares with the 11.5 and falling amount of funding through core spending power. So clearly there's a gap there already. Some of that's being made up through investment income, some of that's being made up through contributions from reserves. But it's clearly a somewhat straitened position to that extent. It's worth bearing that in mind. The investment income line is included in there, so there's some non-service budget allocations within there, but the operational planned spending and the operational funding balance out. So in terms of the current position, there is a balance around that position. So we can just move on. Turning to the council's own financial position. This is about understanding the strengths and weaknesses, the opportunities, the risks associated with our own position. We have had a number of issues and concerns in recent years. We have had some issues around the timing around the accounts, not so much to do with officers. There has been all sorts of difficulties in terms of COVID funding, identifying how some of those grants were to be attributed across the accounts. However, that's meant that triangulation between the accounting position, the audited accounting position, and the planning position has not always been possible, and as a result the council has historically taken quite a cautious approach to financial planning. Not a bad thing in many respects. What we can see, however, is that despite that, there's been consistently strong results. The council's done pretty well. And there's been surpluses for a number of years, and that's enabled contributions to be made to reserves. We are in a situation, we know, where there's no future funding growth. That's the core spending power position that I just referred to. And the council expects to be reorganised in 2028. So these are the different salient points, to my view, based on my experience in doing this work, but also this is the key subject matter that's come up in conversation with the finance member working group in trying to put together the strategy for future years. And there's a last point around strong benchmarking, all of which is very simple commentary statements. But if we can move to the next slide. This is just a picture which demonstrates, it's based on the data, based on the published reports, what members should be able to see there. The orange lines below the dotted line, the black dashed line is the break-even point. The orange bars extending below it are the surpluses. And the blue lines above, the blocks above, that's where we had expected an overspend based on a difference between funding and spending, and therefore put in place savings arrangements to ensure that we didn't overspend. And in several of those years, what you can see is we started out with a savings plan, we delivered the savings plan, but we also delivered a surplus. That's a pretty strong position in many respects. Moving to the next slide, the impact of that is that usable reserves have grown since 2019. You can see that each of those bars, apart from 2022 where it drops slightly, generally speaking, they're moving upwards. And the dark blue at the bottom is the general reserve. That's the unearmarked kind of general purpose reserve. The orange blocks are the earmarked reserves, which arise for a variety of different reasons. The green blocks are capital receipts, and the blue blocks are the capital grants unapplied. So we can carry forward capital grants where we haven't spent them. The bulk of that you will be able to see is just illustrate. It's the earmarked reserves have grown and the general reserves have grown. The pink line in there refers to the 2.6 million of general reserves, which is preferred by councillors in terms of a minimum level of core balances to be held under all circumstances. So it just gives you a sense of the relationship between the overall level of usable reserves and the core reserves that we wish to keep hold of. To the next slide. This is the detail. You can see the Maldon in pink at the top. This comes straight out of the detail that's on the gov.uk website published by the government relating to the provisional settlement. It starts out, it says England in the top, and then you just do the drop down and you select your council. I selected Maldon, and it gives us the relevant details in there. You can see the core spending power settlement from 24-25 out to 28-29, and it just illustrates the yellow block at the top. The new fair funding allocation drops from 4.7 million down to 3.4 million. That's the government funding. Meanwhile, council taxes, if you like, picking up the slack throughout, and overall the position drops slightly across the period. Moving to the next slide. Core spending power since 15-16. This is our local position on the left-hand side, and the right-hand side is an Institute for Government slide which analyses the same issue but right across all of local government. And what you can see throughout is that council tax at the bottom grows steadily. So that's been pretty much the trend for 10 years or more. You can see in the Institute for Government slide that 2009-2010 through to 15-16, 16-17, the government contribution is dropping off fairly substantially. Since then, it's come back up slowly, but it's still barely reaching the level that it was previously. This just gives a general picture of as to how Maldon sits, and our position is really not that different to the condition of most of the rest of local government in this respect. Moving on. The benchmarking point, I think, is a useful one to bear in mind. The Band D charge, we're currently pretty much in the middle of the pack by comparison with other Essex districts. Core spending power per person, again, very much kind of in the pack. We're not at the top, we're not at the bottom. The slightly different coloured chart number 3 shows the usable reserves per person. It's easiest, because of the different sizes of the different districts in Essex, to split it up per person to get a sense of usable reserves per person. Again, that tends to show us pretty much in the middle. Those positions on usable reserves, however, are distorted if the council has a social housing responsibility. So if the council has something called the HRA, the Housing Revenue Account, there's an obligation on the part of the council to hold different types of reserves, including the major repairs reserve. That means that the reserves position per person becomes quite different. So if you strip that information out, you get to the table, the chart at 4, usable reserves per person. So it's just the non-HRA councils that you can see. Well, actually, ourselves and Rochford are quite similar. Chelmsford isn't far behind. That just gives a picture, hopefully, in terms of how we benchmark. It doesn't tell us what we should or shouldn't do. It's just a sense as to looking across the patch, what's the data telling us. If we can move to the next slide, this is about productivity. This is an interesting challenge because I think it's right to bring a challenge around, well, how do we deliver value for money in local government or in the public sector in general? How do we deliver productivity? What happens in terms of productivity? We know we do quite a lot around efficiency. We constantly hear the refrain about trying to do more with less. So on the officer side, this is something where we're regularly kind of scratching our heads and saying, okay, so core spending power is pretty flat, but the population's growing. We've got inflation coming through. We've got a number of different pressures outside of the stuff that we can easily monetize and quantify. There's been quite a few changes recently, not least in terms of some of the planning provisions from the new government, but throughout the last 10 years, every so often there's some changes in our responsibilities and new things that we need to do. It always seems to be that new things are being added rather than old things being taken away, unfortunately, but that's the nature of what we do. So we're absorbing that. The gap is approximately 3% per year for us. It's slightly different, I think, if you compare us with the English Shire districts, partly because our population has grown slightly quicker than the national average. So if you look at the pressures in the table, population and inflation is about 5% year to year for Maldon. English Shire districts around 4.8, near enough the same. Funding for us has grown a little bit more. We've had a little bit more of a benefit around that. Some of that has been to do with population. The new funding formula from government is still following something which is largely driven by population, but they're taking much more account of deprivation. And there's a couple of tables, not in the slides, but in the report from the Institute for Government, where they've taken deprivation, so deciles of deprivation, so the top 10% most affluent versus the top 10% least affluent. And you can see within that actually the losses in funding have disproportionately affected the least affluent populations. And even with some of the increases in spending nationally, that's still not been a position that's been recovered. So it's not comfortable for Maldon to be seeing core spending power diminishing, but within the wider context, there's a clear logic, at least for the political lights of the current national government. They're trying to shift funding towards areas of greater levels of deprivation. So that's just the way that it works. The bar chart on the right hand of this slide shows year by year Maldon Council's WTE, the whole time equivalent. So if you take all of the staff who work for us, some will work 4-day weeks, some will work a 3-day week, most of us will do a 5-day week, but it varies. So if you put it all together into a whole time, a standard whole time, it provides an easier way of counting it and comparing it between years. And what you can see is that in 17-18 and 18-19, we were looking at kind of the 193, 194 whole times. 24-25 we're currently about 188. So the current level of hold times in the council hasn't really changed in about 8 years. Now, I think part of the reason for bringing this in is similar to the previous item and talking about successful delivery of capital schemes, because unfortunately a lot of the time what councillors will see is there's a problem with the scheme and we're asking for a bit more money to be approved. So all that you hear is the bad news. So trying to give a bit more of a balanced position. Quite often, I think what councillors will see is a request for funding for a post. So you'd be forgiven for thinking that actually there's a large number of posts coming through. We're growing, we're constantly growing, because you won't necessarily see where posts become vacant and don't get replaced. So this is actual hold times rather than budgeted or structural hold times. So the position here is that we are doing, we're under, the financial pressure is going up, the population is going up, the requirements of staff tend to be going up because we've got different regulations coming through from government. Actually, the staffing level is fairly flat. That's taking a overall view and it's trying to put into a context, and I completely understand where councillors may be coming from. You will be seeing things requesting another member of staff here, a number of member of staff there. Actually, the overall position is it tends to be fairly flat. That's a bit of context. Anyway, moving on, I think the next slide really just sort of wraps up the end of that. So a canter through the content of the medium-term financial strategy, trying to set out some of the key issues that the council is facing and to shape those in line with the conversations that I've been privileged to have with the finance member working group. So we've met since June, not exactly monthly, but there's been almost monthly meetings. We've had the opportunity to talk through a lot of these issues as we've gone through. The recommendations are set out there. If I hand it back to you, Chair, and if there's any questions, I'm happy to take them.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Jay. So we've got the recommendations. Little one, that the committee considers the principles of the MTFS set out in the report, agrees any changes and makes recommendations as appropriate to the council, that the committee recognises that the MTFS has been developed through ongoing consultation with the finance member working group in its meetings from June 2025, and there's an additional recommendation, recommended little 3, that the committee notes that further adjustments to the MTFS may be necessary depending on the final 26-27 financial statement. Any significant changes will be highlighted in the council papers, and I understand some of those is imminent in terms of what we're going to see. So those are the recommendations. I so move. Do I have a second? Councillor Lagan, thank you very much. Members, questions? Councillor Stamp.
Yeah, little 3, we didn't have it, did we?
No.
Is it added later?
This is an addition.
Okay, so that'll be in the minutes, won't it?
Yes.
Because I just haven't got it on my
It isn't
paperwork.
on, no, it is an addition, and it's addition because actually the situation is imminent in terms of what the Yep, Mr. J.
I'm not knocking it. I just
No, I understand.
need
Just
to
Mr.
have
J
it,
will
so
just
in case
clarify that for you.
So just to clarify the position, different councils do this in different ways. We've had the provisional settlement just before Christmas. So that's the provisional settlement. There's a period of consultation. Government will then issue a final settlement. I'm expecting that to come through in the next week or two. It will often drop slightly before we've got our scheduled council meeting. There may, as a result, be a need to make some small changes to the budget papers. If that's the case, I will make those changes and flag them, and in presenting them to full council, we'll make sure that it's clear where those changes are and why they come through. To some extent, this is a belt and braces measure. I understand, talking with Tara, that this is something which has been routinely done in prior years, so it's consistent with prior years. It's just to flag that there could be that change between provisional and final settlement, in which case it would be appropriate for me to inform members that that's the case and to do that in an appropriate and transparent manner. That's all.
Yeah, can I now ask my question? Yeah, so thank you. It's just that it would have been nice if we'd have had it before, just to have it with my paperwork. Just to go to your page 16, you've covered it about the full-time employees, and you gave an explanation of that. I think members who've been around a while, does your information include staff members that came to us under a grant scheme, or were they classed as additional staff? Because I remember quite some time we always had a temporary member of staff for X amount of money to deliver X, Y and Z project. So where does that show in yours? Because you've said it's the staff numbers have pretty much stayed the same, and you've said that, you know, about delivery of, I'm just questioning your explanation really, because I think there are reasons where changes have happened in the past. So thank you.
The whole time data I've taken from the annual HR return on the gender pay gap analysis, which is done into a standard format. And I'll be absolutely honest, when I was going through it, I know it's a consistent piece of data and you can go back quite a long time and it's published on the website, so it's convenient. I didn't pick up immediately whether it includes all of those bits and pieces, which will be sometimes a full year, whole time, sometimes not, in terms of interims, agencies, etc. I can have a look at that and see what we can find out.
Can I just point out, sorry, Councillor Ficker, I'll come to you just a moment. Ms. Bird has just pointed out to me that actually there will be an additional recommendation, which is because this will be going to council. So I'll read out what the additional recommendation says. To the council, that the revised medium-term financial strategy, Appendix 1 to the report, and any subsequent necessary adjustments be approved. So we will be asking of the council that this is approved. It's just to sort of formalise that process. So actually what we will be asking of the council is that they approve it. Whether they do or not is down to the council, but that's what we would be asking of the council. Councillor Fiddick, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, Mr. J, on figure 3, page 344, we've got the estimated yield from council tax. 6 to 30.5 on 25-26. I'm just wondering, those numbers in there, are they numbers that the government has said that they estimate that our council tax yield will be, or they are estimates?
I compared what government gave us with our estimates. I've used our estimates, although actually, certainly for the 26-27 year, I think we were 20,000 higher than their estimate, so it was pretty close between us. They take the data that we provide them, which we also use for our calculation, and put it through their process. The numbers were pretty close, but yes, it's our numbers that we're using.
Okay, right, I was going to say, because that's quite, it's about a 4.8% increase each year, you're reckoning then?
Yeah, and it's built of 2.99 on the charge plus I think it's slightly over 1.6 on percent growth on the base.
Okay, and that's the existing base that we've got?
Yeah, it's consistent with the decision that was approved by full council in December, where we moved up, and it's those numbers consistent and worked through.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Any other? Councillor Morgan?
Yes, thank you, Chair. On the same chart, I just noticed the homelessness, rough sleeping and domestic abuse figures. Is that money coming from central government?
Yes, government has taken a view that they wanted to do two things. They wanted to reduce the number of grants relating to that sort of general area of activity. They wanted to consolidate them, and they also wanted to try and stop them being year to year to year, and set them out as being a kind of a consistent grant stream across the period, which is what we can see here. That does also mean, however, that some of the other grant headings have changed. So on the officer side, we're dealing with some of the detail of what is changing between the current year grant funding that we're receiving for those sort of general areas of activity and the eligibility for the funding in the new year.
Right, thank you. I presume, therefore, it's sort of effectively hypothecated to those particular...
That will be set out in the terms of the grant. I don't think I've seen the detail of that, but it will be coming through. I'm expecting that 75 to 80% of it will be consistent with prior years. It will be a degree of rebadging. There could be some other areas where they're trying to bring things in or exclude things from previous
Sorry,
years.
one further question, if I may. We are probably lucky in this district that perhaps that isn't quite as necessarily as much that would necessarily be spent as other districts might be. Is that a matter
I think I'll defer to colleagues in the room who may have more information than I do, but I think certainly within the general picture that there are certainly districts in the country who have higher rankings in the index of multiple deprivation. I would therefore assume also that some of those issues around homelessness, rough sleeping, domestic abuse, etc., are less prevalent in Maldon than perhaps they are in other areas. But that's not to say that that doesn't also cause problems. Sometimes being small can cause problems as well.
Any other questions, members? No? Okay, so we have got the three recommendations that are up, plus, and I will add this other one which I'd mentioned, that we also need to make a recommendation to the council that the revised medium-term financial strategy appendix 1 to the report and any subsequent necessary adjustments be approved. So we will be asking the full council to approve this, again, if they choose to. Can we take a vote on those as a group? Those in favour, please. Those against, carried. Thank you very much. Okay, we move on, or we move backwards, however you want to look at it. So we move from 12 to agenda item 11, which is the proposed budget 26-27, which can be found on pages 305 to 338. And again, Mr. Jay, you're presenting this. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So for the committee, I'll adopt the same process, if I may, as with the previous item. The slides, I'll work through the slides, and the slides set out, hopefully in a fairly accessible way, the substance of the detail which is included in the text report and within the agenda pack. So just a general point that it's worth raising, and I will also obviously be sharing this as part of the training, the budget briefing for councillors on Monday. I know that councillors will be familiar with this for prior years, but I think it's just worth noting, should anybody want to bring forward an alternative budget, of course that's provided for within the Constitution. And I would always say, when talking to councillors, that doesn't necessarily mean you need to take the entire budget pack and rewrite it. You can simply take some of the proposals within it and say, would it be okay to do this instead of that? And we can take it as, if you like, a single item change. I'm sure you're all familiar with that, but it's always worth just kind of flagging that so that councillors are fully aware of it. If we can move to the next slide. A nod, of course, to the corporate plan, reference to that. It is, of course, an important part of the framing, those salient points which I raised in the previous item on the agenda, and the way in which we tackle those different elements that we're seeing in the wider environment. We flex that through the corporate plan, so it's worth bearing all of that in mind as the proposals for the budget for 26-27 have been brought together. Part of the process that we've looked at is to look at, well, how do those support different priorities within the corporate plan. Just move on. So just to try to give some of the big numbers, within this slide and the next slide, I think it's difficult sometimes because again, we can often go to schedules of numbers and consider lots and lots of detail. I think it's important to also get the balance right and try to say, well, what's the overview? So the revenue budget for Maldon Council for 26-27, as set out in the agenda pack, proposes 5.1 million of new investment. So there's already the 13.5 million in the base budget, which we've talked about. We've seen that that's performing well in the current year, and we've already got an agreed 7.9 million capital programme. So there's a further 5.1 million that's being proposed to be invested alongside those other amounts. The budget is very much focused around the idea of protecting important local assets and investing in community assets ahead of reorganisation. I think that there's a understanding amongst councillors, further to the discussions that full council has already had around reorganisation, that as we progress from Maldon District Council to a unitary council on a new footprint, this particular area of the geography may not be uppermost in the minds of the new councillors in the new authority or the new officers in the new authority. We do have an opportunity that's arisen from, particularly from our reserves position as it currently stands. We do have an opportunity to invest in assets, to invest in the local community in a way which will yield benefit for a number of years to come. We don't know what the new unitary will do, but I think it's worth considering what it is that we can do at this point to influence how some of those decisions might progress. I think the simple choice in a way is, if the assets that we pass across are somewhat dilapidated, well, they're not going to be too keen to invest loads of money when actually they're going to be dealing with a lot of other problems, including things like the new pressures as they pick up on different aspects of social care in a unitary authority. If, however, we pass across our assets in good order, well, actually, they don't need to do an awful lot to keep them going. And hopefully that will set up a pattern that will be useful for residents, useful for tourism, useful for local business, etc. As we move through 27-28, I can't see how it would be easy for councillors to entertain continuing with new and substantial, extremely high value investments, because actually in the year before reorganisation, surely that's where things would be dying back a bit. At which point the logic for me becomes the 26-27 budget is the point at which we should be looking to take decisions and to get things moving. If we're going to do any of this, this feels to me to be the right point at which we should be considering it. If we can move on, to summarise the way that I've tried to bring this together, the proposals here include the revenue budget proposals, 1.678 million, the urgent repairs and renewals proposals, which, depending on the level to which those are agreed, currently proposed at 751,500. Those will be added into revenue budgets, but as one-off items. And then the proposal for an additional 2,671,000 of capital investment. That's the breakup of the 5.1 additional that's being proposed. And the table is set out to try and show how different elements of expenditure will fall into different areas of activity. So, for example, parks and open spaces, that's where the majority is falling, and there's a breakout there of how some of that falls into some of the different areas of the council. Some will be cross-district, some will be targeted around Promenade Park and Maldon Town, because that's where the bulk of the tourism, the tourist visits will transpire. But you can see that some of that is within the repairs and renewals and some of that is within capital. I didn't want councillors to feel as if there was items coming forward on one schedule and similar items coming forward on a different schedule, and officers weren't enabling councillors to make that comparison and to see easily how the quantum of it was adding up in terms of different areas. So hopefully this is helpful for councillors, because you can see where different areas of investment are taking place and what those different investments are. Moving on. In terms of the funding, this is important in terms of the political decisions. I've touched on this already. The base budget is effectively funded you can see in that first column, that base budget spending, it is funded largely through core spending power, but also through the EPR, grant amount, investment income, the savings, which we'll come to shortly, and application of reserves to a limited extent, and that could vary as we go through the year. Effectively, that's the base budget, that's the ongoing continuing operations of the council. Revenue growth is funded through reserves, or is proposed to be funded through reserves. Repairs and renewals is also proposed to be funded through reserves. Capital is proposed initially to be funded through reserves. That could include internal borrowing, and as councillors will be familiar from previous discussions, not least around the waste vehicles and the leisure contract, internal borrowing is a temporary measure which usually leads inevitably to external borrowing. So some of the capital could easily be funded through reserves, but we may move to a position where we are taking on external borrowing, which is completely usual and quite a common thing across the world of local government, and we'll come to that in a moment. The point here is that if there are revenue growth bids with which councillors disagree, or repairs and renewals with which councillors disagree, or capital proposals with which councillors disagree, actually it's quite easy, because effectively you say, well, we don't agree with that, and the decision is taken in full council. That's okay. Actually, from my side, making the technical adjustment to the budget is completely straightforward. It's that base budget element, which I think probably my advice to councillors would be, that's probably worth leaving alone, because that's the bit that keeps everything working as it is pretty much at the moment. So that's the piece where that would seem sensible to leave. The other areas are fairly easy to change. Hopefully, from that perspective, councillors won't feel as if this is boxing them in to a decision, because that is absolutely not the intention. I can move on. This just sets out the changes in the base budget areas that I've just described with a bit more detail, and it references back as well to the detail in Appendix 1. So Appendix 1 of the budget proposals, this sets it out and breaks it down to cost centre level. And that's a very usual thing, I know, for this council, and it's very usual for other councils as well. It gives, hopefully, members a degree of confidence that we've worked through this in a strong level of detail, and that gives us a good basis through which we can undertake the financial management that's necessary in the coming year. If we can move on. The savings proposed, 824,000. This is also detailed in page 311 of the text report. It's also included, obviously, in the detail of the proposals. This is all about taking opportunities, corrections, bringing things up to date. It's largely a technical set of adjustments. It doesn't have a direct impact either on the supplier base or on the staff base, which could be, I expect it could well be quite different to some of the savings proposals that we've seen in previous years. These are easy opportunities, and I would always prefer to take these kinds of opportunities rather than moving towards reductions in services, reductions in staff base and so forth. Although there could be, should we need to, options that we could go to, that's always an option. Again, if we move on. Repairs and renewals. This is a tricky one. Because the numbers are quite big and it seems quite diffuse in terms of what's actually happening. We've got an asset base of around 44 million. Some of this was discussed this morning in different ways and touched on by Strategic Asset Working Group talking through some of these issues. We've got an asset base in terms of book value per the accounts of about 44 million. The table that you can see top right, repairs and renewals spend in recent years, average of 130,000. 130,000 is quite a big number. 44 million is definitely a big number. And I guess the question is, well, are we spending enough on repairs and reserves? Well, how on earth can we work that out? And I was trying to work out a way of communicating this as simply as possible. Actually, if you take 3 noughts off each of those numbers and turn it into a car, if you had a car worth 44,000, would you be setting aside £130 only in the year to manage a car worth 44,000? Because actually 130 will probably get you a pair of tyres.
It half a tyre.
Depends on the car. Oil check. I suppose what I'm trying to get to there in an understandable and straightforward manner, and this isn't straightforward because actually the detail around repairs and renewals is complex. This is a pretty complicated asset base that we work with. The point there is it doesn't intuitively feel as if setting aside the amount we have been setting aside in previous years is sufficient to make sure that the assets are maintained in good order. That's my sense of it. That's what I see professionally in terms of what I can see with the accounts, but also intuitively that's what strikes me. And that's part of the reason why I'm suggesting, certainly on the back of the discussions I've had with officer colleagues and with councillors through the Finance Management Working Group, it would seem to make sense to invest in our assets a bit more this year than we have done in recent years, partly because we want to leave that good legacy for residents as we move through reorganisation. If we move on, this just provides the detail of the repairs and renewals that have been put forward and the proposals that have been made. There was an exchange this morning, officer member working group with SORG, and one of the officers was asked, I think I was also asked the same question, do we think that relevant repairs and renewals have been brought forward? I think this list is probably exactly that list. I can't confirm that because it's difficult to confirm that for all areas of activity, but I think the simple point is in approaching officers to come forward with bids for investment in terms of repairs and renewals that were urgent, which if we don't do them are likely to lead to an interruption of service to some extent. I effectively invited them to cast the net wide, and that's what they did. Hopefully that's fairly straightforward to understand. I know there's quite a lot proposed in there, and I'm happy to talk through, and colleagues are here as well, happy to talk through some of the detail of that. And I know Finance Working Group, we spent a session in mid-December going through the detail of this, and officers presented a great deal of detail at that stage to help support and evidence the reasons for the proposals that are included there. If I progress through this, obviously there will be an opportunity shortly for discussion. If I move to the next slide, I've mentioned already the fact that government assumes that we will make the change to the council tax charge. This is what the change looks like. There are different options that could be entertained, but I think it's in the first instance, my advice to councillors is if government is assuming that we make this change, it would seem logical to follow that. There are other opportunities. It could be done in a different way. However, what I would say is that if the money comes to the council can often leverage that and do more for residents than residents may well be able to do for themselves if, for example, we were to freeze council tax at the current level, or if we were to even say, well, could we leave it and not bother with council tax at all in the coming year. I'm sure through the process towards reorganisation and the volatility that we're seeing across different councils in terms of political disposition, we could see quite a lot of interesting approaches to all of this. Nothing wrong with any of them so long as they stay within the law. There's lots of different opportunities. My contention would be I think the council knows how to leverage a supply chain to bring investment appropriately into the area to make all of that work. It's a member decision, however. If we move on. For me, this is one of the most important slides. There is no point in making the kind of proposals that I'm setting out based on the extensive work with officers and members in the Finance Member Working Group if actually the whole thing doesn't really work in terms of the solvency and the sustainability of the council. So this summarises the detail which is set out in Appendix 5. And what it does is to start at the top with the current forecast at period 8. This is the movement in reserves, taking all of the earmarked reserves together, the general reserves and then the general usable reserves. There's a couple of adjustments which aren't yet included, which I'm expecting to need to make before the end of the year. That then gives us a start point for the 26-27 year, and then the figures are consistent with the figures in the other slides. Gives us an in-year usage and balance, and then a start position for 27-28. And then at the bottom, it gives us the start position for 28-29. So this circled number, that's 7,584,000 in the bottom right. If all of this was agreed, that would be the value in reserves the balance, the positive balance that will be transferred to the new authority from the 1st of April 2028. Crucially, within that assumption is external borrowing of 10 million, which is also highlighted just above there. I'm assuming that we will get to a point where we wish to take out, or will need to take out external borrowing during the 27-28 financial year. We don't need to do it immediately, but I'm assuming that it's likely to be necessary as we go into 27-28. That would externalise the internal borrowing that we've already identified for the waste vehicles, the leisure centre, etc. But then we'd externalise it. That would give us the ready cash. It would keep the balance at the level we'd need, and we would be holding a debt from probably the Public Work Loan Board. So that's part of the Treasury. It's a pretty safe and well-travelled approach to taking out that kind of borrowing. If we just move on to the following slide, this is just to set out. This also references to page 272, which is part of the Treasury Management Strategy, which is the part of the budget report which properly deals with these matters. The current position is set out on the left-hand side. The current position is that we have an operational boundary for borrowing of 12 million and an authorised limit for borrowing of 16.5 million. So the operational boundary is the guideline in terms of the operation of the cash balances of the council as we proceed through the course of the year. Should it be necessary to take out external borrowing, members have already signed off in February 2025 permission to do so up to a limit of around about 12 million. The absolute drop dead position is 16.5. Those values aren't values you can calculate. They're values which are estimated and approved. It's usual for the CFO to estimate and propose values, and members then to agree or disagree the values proposed. The levels of borrowing taken out by different authorities vary widely. And what I've tried to do on the right-hand side of the slide is to provide some context for members around how external borrowing is undertaken by different authorities. So looking at the table on the left-hand side.
Can I interrupt you? Can you tell me where that is, please? Because I'm not following this and I need to follow it, please. I do forgive me. Where can I find that?
Page 272 of the agenda pack, 272.
Just bear with me, please.
Yeah. Yep.
Is everybody else following it then, or is it just me? 272, I've got applications for different somewhere else, dedicated hours. I've got a different thing, Chair. That's why I can't find it.
Let's find it.
Yeah. Is it on the slides that you're going to, these ones?
Sorry, I misread my own notes. The agenda pack for council on the 13th of February 25, page 272, that's the most recent approved Treasury Management Strategy, and that's where it's set out. So, bear with me.
I'm not embarrassed by saying I'm not following it.
Yeah. I can put the link somewhere. The link is there, and the link is to the 13th of February full council meeting with the prudential indicators at Appendix 1. I'm looking at it now, and it's the table which I've shown you there. So that it's not in, sorry, my mistake, and I misled you inadvertently. The agenda pack for last February's full council meeting approved the Treasury Management Strategy 25-26. That sets out the detail which you can see in the slide. So that's an existing position, so that's already approved. That's the point.
I'm sorry, I haven't got a clue what you're talking about.
It's so the important point is that permission for borrowing has already been given by members to officers.
Yes, by all means.
Yeah, because that's what I'm struggling with. I don't remember that being approved. So that came to full council, did it? Yes. And full council just whacked that through because it was a recommendation from S&R. That's what I'm trying to follow. Did it happen? Okay.
effectively, yes.
So, okay, all right. Well, I didn't know we'd agreed to do external borrowing on that level. That's fine.
So if I go back to the slide then, so I think it's helpful in a way that clarifying the point, external borrowing is already provided for within the policies of the council. However, to date, the council has not yet taken out external borrowing because the opportunity often exists to reduce cost by using internal borrowing ahead of using external borrowing, because then you lose some of your investment income, but you're not yet into MRP and other areas of sort of the repayment side of things. If I can turn to the slide, the current slide as shown, and the table which is shown on the right hand side, what this shows is that if you look at shire districts, currently 40% of shire districts have no borrowings, but that's where they also, like us, we don't have a social housing responsibility. Shire districts with no borrowings, where there is a social housing responsibility, doesn't exist. Every shire district with a social housing responsibility has borrowing. At the moment, effectively, if you flip that, 60% of shire districts like us have got a level of borrowing. If you look at all council types, 27% without a social housing responsibility don't have any borrowings at all. If you have a social housing responsibility, again, across all types, it's 0.6% have nil borrowings. What that indicates is that it's more likely for a council to take out borrowing if it's got social housing responsibility, but actually most councils, whether they've got a social housing responsibility or not, have taken out borrowing. Within shire districts, the average level is 90 million. If you split that, it's 155 million on average where there is social housing, 57 million on average if there isn't social housing. So in a different context, a council not dissimilar to Maldon could well have taken out on average 57 million of borrowing. Some are considerably higher and some, as it says, are currently like us at nil. So to some extent what I'm trying to say here is that the data indicates that taking out external borrowing is quite commonplace, and for an authority like us to take out up to 16 million, which is the possibility as set out in our current policies, would still place us very much at the lower end of the kinds of councils like us where they've taken out borrowing, because the average is at 57 million.
Mr. Jacob, just one moment. I note that Ms Bird has sent all members in the meeting an email with a link to that February 2025 report pack.
Thank you, Tara.
So,
You're welcome, no problem.
We move on. This slide is just to clarify, because there's a lot of different things that have been discussed in the preparation of the budget. Some things are explicitly included within the budget proposals, others are included in slightly different ways. So, for example, Hythe Quay dredging costs are currently included within some of the reserves movements that have been touched on in a previous slide. That's a part of a previous decision, and the funding will be allocated as and when those costs are incurred. Local plan development costs, we don't yet know because of changes in the regulations exactly what the costs of that are likely to be. However, there is a dedicated reserve that's included within those earmarked reserves, which helps us to understand what's happening with that. So it's not included in the detail of operational spending, it's held as an earmarked reserve as an alternative. In terms of the proposals that were being talked about this morning around sort of museum and so forth, other possible, we don't yet have a clear business case around how some of that could be developed, so those costs aren't yet included. However, it is worth noting that there remains sufficient financial capacity within the current permissions and policies to be able to fund that, should that be what members would like to see happen. Moving on. The section 25, it's a bit of a weird one. I am required as section 151 to give personal assurance to councillors regarding the robustness of the estimates, to the adequacy of the reserves. What I'm hoping I've demonstrated through these slides is that the estimates are robust in that we understand them, they are reasonably costed, and certainly the detail of the operational budget is confirmed through the period 8 item previously taken on the agenda. In terms of the adequacy of the reserves, we have sufficient and we have policies in place to enable the minimum level of balance at 2.6 million to be retained. And should there be unanticipated shocks, whatever those might be, having 7.5 million on hand at the end of 27-28 suggests to me that probably we've got sufficient in hand to deal with most likely kinds of things which might not normally be included within a budget. Anything at a national or geopolitical level would need different kinds of intervention. We wouldn't be expected to tolerate those on our own. So I'm comfortable in providing that assurance. I draw attention to it, not least because partly as a result of some of the Section 114 notices that councils have taken or 151 officers have presented to councillors in other councils, there is increasing level of scrutiny of the Section 25 assurances, actually, particularly in a larger, more complex authority. How can the 151 genuinely give those assurances with confidence? This is slightly more straightforward. It's a smaller authority, but I'm comfortable because I've gone through and I'm hoping that that's demonstrated in the slides that I presented. And then the next slide is back to the recommendations, and I'm hoping that's it for now.
Thank you, Mr. Jay. That was a lot to take on board. But we have a number of recommendations. So the following to the council, this will be to the recommendation to the council, the following be discussed and approved. The reduction in core spending power allocation is set out in the provisional financial settlement for local government, section 4.2 below. B, the base budget changes from 25-26 to 26-27, section 4.4 and appendix 1. Little c, the revenue budget, growth bids received and recommended growth and savings as discussed by the finance member working group, section 4.7 and appendix 2. The repairs and renewal schemes proposed for 26-27, section 4.8 and appendix 3. The average band D council tax of 238.95, excluding parish precepts, which is £6.94 or 2.99% increase from 26-27. That's under section 4.9, appendix 4. The impact on reserves and the current policy for reserves, including of a minimum general fund balance of 2.6 million, as discussed by the finance member working group, section 4.10 and appendix 5. Consider the proposed policy on excess reserves, paragraph 4.10.3, and the advice of the Chief Finance Officer, section 151 officer, regarding the robustness of budgets and adequacy of reserves. I so move. Do I have a second? Thank you, Councillor Burrell-Cook. Members' questions? Councillor Stamp.
Yeah, could I actually ask about where is it little f that I can vote against, or because it sounds like you're going to take them en masse. I would like to minuted and noted against. I do not agree that we are going to borrow 10 million, and I think this what this council's doing to say how we have been cautious, and everything that this council's proposing to do, the majority is fine, but I don't agree with taking a 10 million borrowing out to have a reserve of 7 million, unless I've misunderstood what Mr. Jay has just said. That is my understanding. So I'd like it, if you could advise, thank you. If you could advise me where I could have that minuted, that I do not agree with borrowing 10 million.
Well, I think having said it, you've got it minuted, but we can look for a way which maybe we can identify within the voting, I think, which is what you're asking.
That's
for,
what I'm asking.
Yeah. I understand. Councillor Fittock.
Thank you. I mean, Mr. Jay, on the Appendix 2, I don't know what page it would be, probably. Not got a header, but it's break. Sorry? Yeah, but I've got a document, Appendix 2. But it starts off with neighbourhoods and communities and so forth. I mean, one of the things I notice is a lot of movement from the Transformation Fund to cover various activities. I'm not entirely sure what the purpose of the Transformation Fund was in the first place, but I get a bit worried when I start to see staff being paid from out of reserves and places like that, because to me, if we've got excess funds in this reserve, then it's a case of moving those monies back into general. And then the budgets, the operational budget should then be putting the bids in against the budgets, because it strikes me that we're confusing what our staff costs are, because when we issue our staff costs and we're paying them not out of the general fund but out of reserves, it gets very confusing exactly what we're paying out and why. And again, moving downwards, the vacancy factor, I can see you're taking it out. Actually, I can understand why, 280,000 or 281,000. The vacancy factor is there to offset the positions that are not actually going to be, shall we say, recruited. So when we're basing our staff budget in that situation, is the staff budget based upon the FTEs that have been approved, or are we now basing the budget on actual hired staff? Because otherwise we're really putting 281,000 back into the budgets that isn't going to be spent, which just creates an excess, doesn't it?
Yeah, Mr. Chair.
So there's 2 points there. The first is around the funding of staffing and how staffing are working. The second was around the vacancy factor. So in terms of the funding of staffing, the current staff base is included within the operational base budgets, and that's fully funded. The proposal being made is where additional staff are proposed, because the operational funding as it stands that's fully spoken for, that's all there. So therefore the logical approach to it, and the approach I'm used to, is saying the bid is coming forward to members to recruit additional members of staff, and it can be funded using the transformation reserve, and that fits with the purpose of the transformation reserve in terms of what the items are there for. So for example, there's it's not quite staffing, but it's a similar idea. Asset management and the GIS stuff. It's an item in there on page 325, which relates to 3,000 there, and transformation reserve. That links back to that, because actually by making that investment, it helps us to transform the council beyond what we're currently doing.
So I was talking about things like development manager, principal senior officer, £112,000 from the transformation reserve. I'm not entirely sure what that's got to do with transformation, but also that's not a one-off cost, that's a recurring cost, isn't it?
Yes, and those recurring costs have been included in the reserves planning because we're working on this 2-year horizon.
Okay, but if I was to look at the budget for that department, for example, then that cost wouldn't be in it, would it?
It won't be going into that department unless it's approved.
We're sadly going to fund it from the trend.
So if it's not going to be approved, then the money will stay in the transformation reserve.
Why not just have it out of the budget, the normal revenue budget, and just move that? If that money's in excess to what's required for transformation, why not put the money back into the general fund and then just pay the wages out of the general fund?
Because the general fund is fully spoken for at this point.
That's the point I'm trying to make there. So, okay.
Is it worth referring to the vacancy factor point? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, the vacancy factor, I mean,
can I just, I understand, I'm not suggesting this is not important. Now, Mr. Wilkinson, do you want to just respond?
Thank you, Chair. I actually think that you're saying the same thing, but slightly differently. Forgive me, Councillor Fitton, I think the point you're making is the money currently sits in the transformation reserve. I think what the Director of Finance is saying is, if we approve this, that money moves into essentially the general fund to pay the salaries. so that it will be accounted for as salaries. Yeah. Okay. Councillor Lagan.
Whereabouts in that report in February did we agree the 10 million? Because Katara's sold it. You gave us a page number, Mr. J, didn't you?
Page 272, the reference is, sorry. Page 272 of the papers that Tyra sent the link round for, and there's a table setting out the operational boundary and the authorised limit. The figure included is 12 million, so the 10 million is less than what's required, and the 10 million is a holding position on the basis that I don't know yet what the actual need will be at that point, if indeed there is one.
I'll just get my head around that. I might come back in a sec. Thanks.
Councillor Morgan.
Thank you, Chair. Just to sort of follow up on Councillor Stamp's point, I probably missed it, probably wasn't just 10 miles over my head, but can you just come through you, Chair, the Foreign Finance Office, explain why we are borrowing 10 million in financial year 27 to 28?
Because the proposals as set out and worked through in terms of the impact on reserves, it's not possible to sustain all of the investment that's proposed through the current year and the following year, based on the cash level of reserves that are held at the present time. The permissions have already been identified, as mentioned, through the February 25 council approval of the Treasury strategy, with the 12 million limit on the sort of the operational boundary for borrowing. So that's already in place. So it's taking advantage of that. Also noting that the previous, sorry, I'm straying from the point. I think the question you were asking was why. It's because if you look at the 7.5 million at the bottom, without the 10, that would be 2.5 million in the opposite direction, at which point you've run out of money. At which point the choice for councillors becomes, we can move forward as per previous approved policy and take out some borrowing. Or alternatively, we take a view that says we don't need to take out borrowing. My professional advice, 151 advice to councillors is it's perfectly safe and reasonable to take out borrowing. If there is a political viewpoint, however, that taking out borrowing is not desirable, that's fine, but it wouldn't be in line with my advice, but that's okay. And in order to therefore make sure that the balance position in the reserves was maintained, we would need to look at the proposals and reduce some of the proposals for investment in order then not to take out the borrowing.
The consequence, of course, is that actually some of the things that we would like to do or have discussed in terms of handing over assets that are in a good state to our successor council, we won't be able to do all that we would like to do. We will have to put a line through some of those, and that will be the consequence. We would just to double check my understanding of this, at the end of the day, we would then be handing over a debt to the successor authority. That's correct, isn't it? Which is what the vast majority of councils will be doing. They will be handing over some sized debt, whatever that is, and actually handing over no debt at all would put us in a very unusual position. So we have an opportunity to actually deliver the things that we've talked about by going down this borrowing route, or if we decide we don't want to do that, then we're going to have to start putting a red line through some of the things that we had wanted to do. Councillor Siddle.
So, and the thing about that debt, could the One Fine Officer cover that debt is then secured against assets? It's not debt that is not against an asset.
Yeah, it's asset-backed debt. There's different ways of looking at it. But it's not free-floating because the debt is taken out for specific purposes. Part of the condition around prudential borrowing within local authorities, the provisions that have been in place since 2004, those provisions mean that it is not possible to borrow for revenue purposes, so it's always secured against an asset.
Sorry, Councillor Fizzick, I think you had your hand up and I...
Yeah, I mean, I think the borrowing, if you like, is to... I mean, when we agreed a leisure contract, the business case was based upon £5.7 million worth of debt. And subsequent to that, that's when we agreed with the up to £10 million. I think it also incorporated the potential to borrow against the internal, or to have a debt against internal borrowing we agreed to on the waste vehicles. But if we take a step back, if we hadn't have had the money in our reserves to fund the leisure contract from internal borrowing, we would have borrowed money. And it was simply a choice that the 151 made at the time to say, look, what's the point of having debt when we can actually use our internal borrowing and not incur the interest from the debt? So I think we've got to look at it that way. And I mean, most businesses, they grow by borrowing. They borrow, they invest, they create revenue. So when we look at the primary, the £6 million of this so-called debt, that was against a business plan that expected to get us, after paying off the debt, around about £10 million profit. Now, I know that we can't borrow under MRP on that situation. We can argue that that's extending the lifetime of the asset. So I think we have to understand that it's normal practice for you to borrow money to make money, although we can't say that's the reason for doing it, because obviously you can't bother to make revenue. But we'd already, the business case was based upon it. So if the business case got approved and it was sound, which it was, all we're doing is saying, well, rather than using our own money, we're going to borrow. And we do that personally all of the time. We might have money in the bank and we say we want to buy a car. Well, I could either buy a car cash, or I can get a loan to buy a car. And people will often get a loan to buy a car, even though they've got the cash, because they want the cash to do with other things. So I would support the borrowing, because I think we've got to make best use of our money. And making best use of money is actually sometimes to keep what you've got to do other things with, and borrow money for something that cost justifies itself, which the leisure contract did. And so that's the sort of the where we are on it. So I'd be quite comfortable with this. Okay.
Okay, any other questions?
I take on
Councillor
board
Stamp.
what's been said, but we don't know that leisure contract is going to do the returns that have been agreed. No, you don't know, and I heard that, but I don't interrupt you when you're speaking. So I'm not convinced. I don't see why we need to suddenly be spending loads of money, because we're not going to be here in 2 years. And the reason what you've said about is putting our assets in good stand. It's not just putting our asset in good stand. We know that there's other projects that have been discussed, and I just cannot. I cannot support these whole recommendations to borrow the 10 million. I understand that, but we're not a business. And I have got real concerns about coming to the audit committees or whatever about the way that we're going to spend this money with the last 2 years, and this council's not here. So that's my entitlement to say that.
Of course it is. You're entitled to say that,
exactly.
Councillor Stamp. So
But-
I just wanted to make sure everybody else has to say as well. I understand.
Well, they haven't got the hands up, have they? And I hadn't finished speaking.
Well, finish your point, and then we will move on. Okay, any other questions in relation to Mr. J?
No, just one point I'd like to raise with members to make sure it's not lost. There is an important difference between the nature of a council and the nature of a business, which is partly that we exist for public benefit, and partly that we're funded through tax. And the tax that we're funded through, as demonstrated through the MTFS position and looking at the way core spending power, the government grant is recycled national taxpayer receipts from different sources, and the council tax is obviously local taxpayer receipts. There's also elements within there obviously of business rates as well. One of the differences as a result between the council as a financial entity and a commercial concern is that taxpayer receipt, that income each year, is written out in law, and that's part of the process that we go through in terms of collecting council tax, chasing people who haven't paid, making sure that we keep our collection rate as high as possible. And it comes through year upon year upon year. And part of the reason that the Prudential Code was set up 20 years ago to enable councils to borrow was to enable councils to borrow against that income stream, knowing that it cannot be changed without being replaced, because otherwise the whole aspect of taxation falls apart. So it's one of those huge decisions that doesn't affect us. Now, I understand that with some contracts there could be concerns because actually the delivery hasn't yet been worked out, and you could be looking 5, 10, 15 years in the future. 5 years before COVID, we didn't expect COVID. We don't know what's going to happen yet next. But one of the things we can be fairly sure about, not wishing to sound cliched, but there is something about death and taxes, and council tax is one of those taxes. It does come through, and the Prudential Code is really there to enable councils to borrow against an income stream that's written into law. So it's less volatile than the income stream that you might find in a commercial concern, which is much more dependent upon the securing of contracts with customers and customers paying up, etc., etc. So there is a rationale to it. It's not dangerous from that perspective. It can be used dangerously, and there's cases in the headlines and everybody knows about them, and some of them are local, where borrowing hasn't been managed in a responsible manner. But for the vast majority of councils, it provides a way to invest in local assets in a way that otherwise they couldn't. I'll leave it there. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Any other questions in relation to this? I mean, the final thing I'd say is, from my point of view, this provides an opportunity to actually address a number of things that we've wanted to do within our community for our residents. If we don't take this chance now and hand it over to the new authority, the likelihood of them doing some of these things that we're wanting to do will be much less, would be my view, but that will be down to members to take a view on that. So we will take these as a group. Members, if we can have a vote, please. Those in favour, show of hands, please. Those against? Okay, thank you.
If I could have it said against F, not go against every recommendation, which is what I actually asked at the beginning of the thingy. Yes, you can. It can be noted.
Well, I've taken that on block. I've done it. I've done it now. Sorry, Councillor Stamp. So I've done it now.
I did ask, Chairman, at the beginning, if you've made the mistake because you didn't listen to me, that's really unfair. I did actually ask.
Well, F does not specifically relate to borrowing. It doesn't
suggest you
specifically.
replay the tape.
Well,
I'd like it minuted somewhere that I actually asked for the advice at the beginning of that, where I could oppose the borrowing of the 10 million. Did nobody else hear me?
You have an opportunity. Well, it's minuted now that you are not happy with that 10 million. That is now minuted. That's clear that you are not happy with it. But actually, as far as the meeting is concerned, they've agreed this. So we will move on. Okay, thank you. So we move on and backwards. So we move now to agenda item 10. So this is capital and investment strategy for 26-27, minimum revenue provision statement 26-27, and treasury management statement 2026-27. Pages 275 to 304. These can be found on, as I say, on pages 275 to 304. Again, Mr. Jay, this is over to you.
Thank you, Chair. We did have quite a good discussion in the previous item relating to many of the aspects of the capital strategy and the related strategies. So just to go very briefly through the headlines, capital strategy objectives are set out on the slide, and they're consistent with previous years. If we move to the next slide, quite a detailed table there which shows proposed spending of 11.2 million across the years 26-7, 27-8 and 28-9. There's 7.9 of existing schemes and 3.2 of new schemes across the period. There's funding is identified to the same level with either internal or external borrowing flagged relating to that. If we then move on, this is a rehearsal of the previous slide and it's the same detail. If we move on again, happy then to move to the recommendations. Obviously, should councillors wish to pick up on any of the details in the appendices in terms of the proposals, more than happy to take questions about that. So I just wanted to move through this one a bit more quickly on the basis that we've already had a good discussion around many of the issues that have been raised. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So the recommendations then are little one, that the committee considers this report and appendices and recommends it to the council for approval on the 12th of February. Oh, hang on. That is not.
That's the other agenda, isn't it? Is that the other one that was bent to the Taurus and
Should say 26.
Oh, right, on 26. Is it, okay, all right. Is that 12th of February 2026? Is that the same? Yeah, it is just 2026. Yes, thank you. Okay. Little 2, that the following be approved: the Capital Investment Strategy 26-27 Appendix 1, which includes the capital programme for 26-27 to 29-30 and the new capital bids projects Appendix 2. Little 2B, the minimum reserve provision statement 26-27 in Appendix 3, and C, the Treasury Management Strategy 26-27 Appendix 4 with the Treasury Management Practices. I so move. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Burrell. Cook. Questions, members? If there are no questions, then we'll go. Councillor Fittock.
Yeah, just on Appendix 1, and we've got MRP, and you mentioned that it can be done over 20 years. But my understanding was MRP needs to be over the lifetime of the asset, or the useful lifetime of the asset. The legislation brought out. So, what have you taken it over to calculate your MRP?
The policy is framed around 20 years. That can be amended. We can either go faster or slower on that, and it does relate back, as you say, to the life of the asset. So it's more flexible, and perhaps that's not clear in the wording.
Okay, so the 642, 678, are you basing it on a 20-year period? Or if you were to take the leisure contract, for example, it was said at the time it would be depreciated over the lifetime of the asset, which wouldn't be 20 years from now. It would be 20 years from 2 years ago. So is this adjusted to equal 18 years or 20 years or 15 years?
It's consistent with the previous discussions. The only external borrowing currently on the cards based on existing decisions is the leisure contract.
Okay.
So it's based on that, and it's based on 20 years, which is consistent with the lifetime of the contract as well as with the asset.
Okay, fine, yeah.
Any other questions, members? No? Okay, so it's been proposed and seconded, so can we have a vote, please? Those in favour? And those against? Okay, carried. Thank you very much. We move on to agenda item 9. Can you find it? Going backwards.
He needs to leave because he's got interest.
Oh, yes, indeed. Thank you. So, agenda item 9 then, business rates and council tax discretionary reductions, page 207 to 274. Again, Mr. J is having a busy night. Mr. J, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. This is a relatively straightforward agenda item. The discretionary reductions need to be approved each year by council. Part of the reason for that is so that we've got clear councillor approval for the different reductions that can be applied. Paragraphs 3.1 and 3.2 set out some of the changes which are included within that, and I think there was a late change as well, which has been circulated, particularly around the announcement from the government a couple of days ago. So clearly this is an area which can be quite fraught, and I understand why, because there's a lot of local interest in that, and it's very important locally. From the perspective of the council and the decision and the agenda for this evening, hopefully it's a relatively straightforward item. It's important to include the full document. Apologies for that being the case, but it's necessary to include the full document for approval, not least because if there's subsequently a dispute, it's then possible to point back to that as being the point of approval as part of the council's case for settling a dispute, whichever way that might go. Hopefully it's relatively straightforward, but happy to take any questions from councillors as appropriate. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. We'll just go to the proposal then. Now, the actual proposal, or the recommendation rather, is found on page 5 of the addendum, which is a proposed change to the recommendations in the original paper that was circulated. So that can be found on page 5, as I say, in the addendum. It is proposed that the recommendations set out in the report are replaced with the following, and this is a recommendation to the council that, subject to incorporation of the previous provisional amendments set out above, amendments to the policy for the granting of discretionary non-domestic rate relief at Appendix 1 to reflect updated government guidance and legislation be approved. Little 2, that the Director of Finance S151 officer, in conjunction with the chair of this committee, is granted delegated powers to consider and make minor technical amendments to the policy for the granting of discretionary non-domestic rate relief in line with final government guidance as soon as reasonably practical to enable the award of this relief to be eligible to businesses. To eligible businesses, sorry. Little 3, that minor amendments to the empty homes and second homes premium policy 2025-26 documented Appendix 2 be noted. And little 4, that minor amendments to the Council Tax S13A1C Government Act 1992 policy document Appendix 3 be noted. Those are the recommendations. I so move to have a second. Councillor Thompson, thank you very much. Questions, members? Councillor Fiddick.
Thank you, Chair. Just up to, I mean, this is obviously in relation to the changes that have just been made. I mean, it could well be under pressure. There's more changes. Would that allow you to be able to make those changes as well?
It's always a joy working with central government on matters like business rates. I would hope so, yes. If there are further changes, it may be necessary to bring that back to a later meeting of full council for full approval. In the extreme, I suspect that hopefully Whitehall will understand that we have got a timetable to work to, so they can't endlessly make changes to these things. I'm not expecting that to come through. It doesn't seem likely, but never say never.
No, I mean, just I wouldn't say that we would go against it. I'm just wondering if the wording needs to be allow that position to be facilitated.
I'm comfortable with the wording as it stands based on what we currently know. If there's anything subsequent, obviously we'll be liaising, taking advice from the monitoring officer and the chair, and we'll bring things back as necessary.
Okay. Any other questions, members? No, in that case, it's proposed and seconded. So can we have a vote? Those in favour, please. Those in favour, if you're going to vote, those in favour. I went to the toilet. Thank you. You did indeed. Yeah, thank you. However, it is still passed. So, so there we go. All right. Thank you very much. Yes, please. Thank you. We'll just wait for a moment while Councillor Burrell-Cook joins us again. Good. Right. Okay. On to agenda item 8. So this is the Council Tax Support Scheme 2026-27, pages 45 to 206. And again, Mr. J.
Thank you, Chair. Again, hopefully fairly straightforward. I think it's important for members to be aware in relation to the Council Tax Support Scheme for the coming year. Again, as previous, it's important to get member approval to this, because it can be something which becomes quite reasonably something that residents who believe they may be entitled to, we might not believe they're entitled to, and it turns into a legal issue. So getting this clear and getting member approval for it is important. I would add, I did discuss with the team whether or not it was appropriate to consider a revision to the scheme. At this stage, again, considering LGR, it doesn't make sense to do a revision. It can take end to end something around 8 to 12 months and would take several officers' time in order to work that through, as well as requiring considerable public consultation around it. I would add that as part of reorganisation, the council tax support schemes, as they currently exist, will need to be harmonised across the successor authorities. As will various other things. But so this will change anyway, probably in 28-29. For now, we're leaving it as it currently works, and there's no clear reason why we would need to change it at this point. And it's an area where we don't need to invest additional activity at this time. So my recommendation is that we move it forwards in the current manner. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So the recommendations can be found on page 45. There's a recommendation to the Council, little 1, that the following changes to the existing schemes are approved. Little A, a cost of living increase in line with the Department for Work and Pension schemes be included in the local council tax support scheme for 26-27 for pensioners only. Little B, that any legislative changes being introduced to the housing benefit scheme for 26-27 are mirrored in the Council's LCTS to ensure consistency. Little 2, that these decisions have been made following members' careful reading of and regard to the Equality Impact Assessment Appendix 1. Little 3, that members note the largely unchanged framework for the hardship provision at Appendix 2. And little 4, that the policy documents at Appendix 3 be approved. I say move. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Spenceley, thank you very much. Members, questions? Councillor Stamp.
Could I make a comment, really? I thank Mr. J for saying that, because when I started to read it, I thought the last time I read these from cover to cover was a long time ago, and I thought I was just going to ask you what the changes were, and you actually said that in your spiel. So I was very grateful, because I'd have felt guilty, but I haven't read it all because it's the same as before.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or questions? No? No? Well, in that case, then we have it's been proposed and seconded, so can we have a vote? Those in favour, please, and those against, carried. Okay, great. So we move on then. This time we go forward rather than back. We move on to agenda item 13, any items of business that the chair decides are urgent. There are none, you'll be glad to know. So that leaves us for me to close the meeting. So I formally close the meeting at 9:42. Thank you.